So the next thing we're going to do, we're going to add these lights, and let's just say the surveyor picked them up. These, when you're adding things like lights, generally it would be in the form of a symbol rather than trying to draw something that looks exactly like that. Things like light sockets, light switches, lights themselves, all those kind of things tend to be shown with symbols rather than too much detail, and the only thing in this case that would be correct would be the length of it. So you might have different length lights. Let's say you had a light that was 1 meter long, another one that was 1.2 meters, maybe one that was only 600 millimeters, and you'd have those saved as blocks, you just use the correct length. But the symbol would look the same, it would just change in length, okay? So in our case, the surveyor has picked up that there's light. This number of lights are 4 in that room, 2 in that room, 4 in that room. And let's just say he's wrote down on the note that they're all 1200 length lights. So for Imperial guys, let's say 4 foot long kind of strip lights. And we're going to draw these as this block, like it's shown here, which is kind of a standard light block. We're going to draw them 1200 long. So let's start by just creating one. And I'll click on a polyline. And I'm just going to do the line 1200, okay? And then I'm going to offset that, and let's offset 50. See how that looks. I'm going to offset it 100. So we're just creating a symbol here, really. There's only that 1200 length which was of any importance. So I'm just going to create a line from those endpoints. Now I'm going to use scale just to create that, to make this line longer. So I'm going to click the scale command, select the line, right click, select the midpoint, and I'm going to scale it by 2. And now it gives us a double length line. So that's just a simple way to do that. We can now mirror it, okay, use the midpoint as the base point, and there we go, and that's our light. I'm going to turn that into a block, and you probably already guessed what I'm going to call it. I'm going to select for the base point, I'm going to select the midpoint here. It doesn't really matter in this case. And for objects, I'll select all of them. And then OK. So now we have this light block here. We can start adding it in the rooms. So in this room, we've got 2 down the center. So first thing we want to do is find a center line. Again, I'm going to create, because we haven't really got a line, we can't use a midpoint of this. We can't use a midpoint of this. I'm going to create a new line. Okay, just here. And then I can find my midpoint. Hold on. And then I'm going to delete that line. You don't want to leave these kind of things laying there because you'll forget they're there and they might cause problems later on. And now I can move the block. I can use the midpoint and put it there. Okay. And I'm going to use grips to move this in. So now our line is the width of the room. I could do a mirror on there, right, and use that midpoint as a base point. And that looks okay. So now we've got 2 lights in our room. I'm now going to use those, and I'm going to copy them. And I'm going to do this by eye. I'm going to put it there, okay. And then I'm going to draw another kind of construction line. I'm going to go from that midpoint to that midpoint. And I'm going to use that to mirror them. So now we've got the 4. And I know this room is the same size as this one. So in this case, I can select all 4, copy from that base point to there. Okay. And for this one, we want 2 lights. I'm just going to, let's see, we could get these in the middle. So I'm going to do a line from there and then take a midpoint down. Remember to delete that one. And now I can copy that midpoint and perpendicular onto that line. So you can see how these object snaps really help you lay things out. And then let's just delete these construction lines. And there we go, we have our room, our lights laid out. Now, is that accurate? No. If you had an electrical guy or you'd actually taken measurements off these, they would tell you exactly where they were. In this case, it's not important. They're indicative. Okay. If this was an electrical light for an electrical technician, you would generally use something like a ceiling grid. So there'd be a ceiling grid in this room, and you would show which squares it was going into, or if it wasn't a ceiling grid, you'd dimension it off the walls for the electrical contractor. But we know how to do all that. We don't need to go into all that detail. It's just indicative in this case. And a lot of the time when you're creating things in CAD, you will be working indicatively like this. Okay, and what you can do now, we could just copy it, use that as a base point, and there we are. Now, I would say there would probably be some lights down the corridor, but we haven't got them on our survey. Maybe they use freestanding lamps or something like that. These two aren't in here either. So we're just following our survey, and that's it. So that's how we get our lights in. Again, don't worry about the colours for now. We'll do that under layers. But you can see we've got our blocks, our light blocks. We've got our door blocks, we've got our window blocks, we've got our wall. So already we've got this floor layout done. It's basically drawn now. It's just a case of tidying it up and applying some standards before we go into the kind of title block. And that's it. So creating those blocks allows you to do same geometry very quickly. And just these, we've still used pretty much basic AutoCAD commands, and we've already got our building layouts. So yeah, fairly simple. You could go away, you could do that, you can measure up a building and draw it up. And in the next few chapters, we're just going to look at tidying it up and applying some standards.